Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's November 15th, 2023. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host today. You can send us your questions and comments to questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them on the YouTube chat page. Helga, I'm going to start with a question I received early this morning. Someone said, as there are already two wars ongoing with U.S. and European involvement, referring to Ukraine and Southwest Asia, there are some hopes that the meeting between U.S. President Biden and China's President Xi Jinping in San Francisco may lead to an improvement in U.S.-China relations. The two countries are at odds over Ukraine, Gaza, Taiwan, trade, and so on. But there was reportedly a warm welcome for Xi when he arrived at the airport, including a delegation with Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary. Given your knowledge of China and concerns with the downward turn of U.S.-Chinese relations, what are your expectations from this meeting?
Well, in an ocean of horrors, I think there are tiny signs of hope. Because, as you say, the welcome was very nice. Flags, American and Chinese flags, were along the streets. A lot of preparation went into this. A lot of meetings took place on all kinds of levels of government before trade, economic, other forms of cooperation. And naturally, from the Chinese side, they have an enormous expectation that this meeting will lead to an improvement of the two most important economies of the world. So, and I think that also from the American side, there are some careful signs that, they want stability. So, in an ocean of instability and horrors, this is at least something of, guarded optimism one can have. So, obviously, one would wish that the historic opportunity would be taken by especially President Biden, because, if I would be Biden, what I would do with this meeting, I would take up the offer of President Xi Jinping, who, has offered to, presidents of the United States before, the special relations among great powers. Now that offer still exists. I think the offer that the United States could cooperate with the Belt and Road Initiative also still exists. And that if the United States President Biden would go that extra step and make any kind of statement saying that, that they could cooperate, this would open up such tremendous opportunities for both sides, but especially for the United States to cooperate and participate in the many, many projects of the global majority. And that would really be, I don't think it will come out at this summit, because, this was too much of a difficulty in the past, the spy balloon and all kinds of issues around Taiwan, the South China Sea. So I do not expect that this particular summit will lead to a gigantic breakthrough. But if, the relations of all levels of government, can be stabilized in such a way that the dialogue can now proceed in a more normal way, as the world demands that, all these big problems are addressed, primarily, naturally, the war in Southwest Asia, the war in Ukraine. Concerning Southwest Asia, China has made a major proposal for a peace conference for the Middle East. The Chinese special envoy is traveling around the region. He was in Turkey, he will go to Egypt. He was before in Saudi Arabia. And, I think that, if the United States would work with China on the initiative for the Southwest Asia conference, this could maybe stop the horror show around Gaza and could lead to a resolution of the situation. Now, these are all very, very big issues, and obviously that the two presidents, I mean, the good thing is they will talk 4 hours together. I think there will be a meeting of cabinet members first, and then there will be a one-to-one meeting with interpreters only. So maybe, one can only hope and really, hope for the fate of humanity, that something major comes out of this summit, or at least the foundations are laid that, in follow-up meetings, this can evolve in a more positive direction. So, as I said, in the world of terrible dangers, if these two countries, the strongest economic power still, the United States, and the rising power, China, if they would be able to overcome the curse of geopolitics, I mean, I think it's very important to study what China is doing, because I think anybody who studies carefully what their policies are, there is no indication that China wants to replace the United States as a dominant power in the world. They want to have a multilateral relation. They want to have a multilateral order. And if the United States would agree to that, I think that, all problems of the world could be attacked and managed. So a lot hangs on this summit, because we are really at a moment in history where, the branches, either we go into an escalation which could end up in World War III, or if reason prevails and we cooperate all in a new paradigm. So that is really the branching point at which this meeting is taking place.
Well, of course, one of the major concerns for the entire world is what's happening now in Gaza, with the continued relentless charge by the Israelis into Gaza, entering Al-Shifa hospital today. There's obviously a danger of an escalation as the death toll is rising. I have a couple questions for you on this. A Palestinian contact asked the question, can anything be done to get the Biden administration to act to stop the killing? And another viewer asked, with more people in the Arab nations that are neighboring Israel going into the streets in protest, is there more that these Arab governments can do to fight for a ceasefire and avoid an escalation to regional war?
Well, I think concerning the first question, I think the Biden-Xi Jinping meeting is the place where, hopefully something will be decided, because it's, in a certain sense, if the United States would be absolutely determined to tell Israel to go for a ceasefire, to take over, the Mideast process negotiations, obviously this is all a very tricky question, but there can only be a diplomatic solution or an escalation. We are sitting right now on a potential powder keg of the enlargement of the crisis. If Hezbollah and Lebanon would get involved, which apparently they don't want to, but the danger is always of uncalculatable developments. And eventually Iran would be involved. We are on the abyss of a potential global war, and the situation naturally in Ukraine should not be forgotten, that is also one situation which either, I think General Kuyat, the former General Inspector of the German Army, had already said end of August, that NATO is in front of a decision of either finding a diplomatic solution immediately or there is an escalation, and that's hanging sort of in a limbo situation, not settled at all. So I think that the best thing which could happen, as I said, is that if out of the summit would come a joint agreement, the United States and China, basically, China has good relations, economic investments in Israel, for example. Israel is confronted with a situation where they also have to think about the long-term or medium-term effect. Do they really want to have an adversarial relation with the Arab neighbors, or do they want to have a situation which finally becomes stable and secure? So I think that the Biden administration should work with China. That's my view, because the Chinese are the only ones who have made a concrete proposal for a Middle East peace conference. And if the United States and China would basically both send that message, something could be done to stop this unbelievable killing which is going on in Gaza, which turns everybody's stomach. So, on the second question, could the Arab countries do something? Well, I mean, they could. They could have done something in the past already, more to help the Palestinians in all kinds of situations. So, I think that they should participate in a constructive role in the Middle East peace conference. And, the only way how this situation can be stabilized is what my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, already said in 1975 when he offered the Oasis plan. This was the idea that you have to have massive economic development in all of these countries, which, most of them are entirely desert. So to start with the creation of new fresh water is absolutely the precondition for any kind of development. And, then you need basic infrastructure. And the situation now is favorable because, the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the offers by China to extend the Belt and Road Initiative into the entire region, the fact that there are many countries who do want to work with the Belt and Road Initiative, such as Egypt, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. So there is a lot of potential to solve the situation. And if everybody would agree that, we have to have a win-win survival perspective for everybody, and that everybody can only benefit if there is joint economic development, and only everybody can lose if there is a continuation of the war. So, hopefully there will be some understanding in this direction.
Now, we're getting a number of questions from the UK. Let me start with two of them from Lori. She referred to the large protest demonstration that took place in London last weekend and said, there's been no reaction from the British government. What can we do to change that? And then from Gordon, who identifies himself as a member of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, asks, why won't Keir Starmer, who's the head of the Labour Party, why won't he support the, quote, almost universal call for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, unquote?
Well, I don't know. I don't know this man well enough or anything about him to answer that question in a serious fashion. I mean, it is very important that these demonstrations continue. I think it's important that they get enlarged. There is a very, very worrisome effort by several governments, in the United States, in Europe, to try to basically put gag orders on what people can say by basically saying that anybody who wants to stop the killing in Gaza is automatically an anti-Semite. And I fundamentally disagree with that, because if you say that the proportionality, which is now completely out of balance, that no matter what you think about the October 7th casualties and horror shows, and condemn that, that does not give Israel the right to basically move in such a way that so many innocent civilians are being killed. Obviously there is a information war, and given the fact that journalists are killed in Gaza too, 40 journalists have been assassinated or killed in one way or another, so that the reporting is becoming extremely scarce, and you cannot verify all of these informations. But it seems, there are some, weapon depots and whatnot in these areas. So that's all a a very complicating factor, but nevertheless, you cannot continue to kill or even bring the warfare into hospitals. I mean, this is the absolute red line of any humanitarian consideration, and therefore, the fighting must stop. I mean, if this is not reversed, it's already now clear that water for hundreds of thousands of people is lacking. Now, people cannot live without clean water for very long. So we are confronted with the worst humanitarian crisis, a total catastrophe, and the only answer has to be a ceasefire. And obviously, the argument that then Israel cannot continue its campaign against Hamas. There has to be a proportionality in there are rules of war, and these rules have to be respected. There are, international guidelines, conventions, which people have agreed upon, and they have to absolutely be upheld. So I think it is important that the demonstration expand, because it's very clear that the governments are trying to contain them, to basically put gag orders on people. But, I think what we are involved in is a test of humanity. I think it was Antonio Guterres, the General Secretary of the United Nations, who said that what is happening in Gaza is a test and it's a crisis of all of humanity. And I think that is absolutely true. And I think our behavior, how we react to that, will be, a sign of are we morally fit to survive or not.
Well, to help you a little bit with the Keir Starmer question, he's considered to be a Tony Blair light. And that brings me to the next question from Helen in the UK, who asked, what do you think of the prospect of Blair being brought in by Netanyahu for humanitarian concerns in Gaza? And she also asked, what do you think about the shakeup in the cabinet in the UK? Is there something bigger here, bringing Cameron in, the former prime minister? So I toss that one to you.
Well, I think to put Blair into this position at this moment is like the worst possible decision one can make. And the cabinet reshufflement, bringing Cameron in, I think they are not they're not changing. They're just continuing the same policy. And I think it is, up to the British people to respond to that.
Okay, and then we have a question on Germany. The question is, the Defense Minister Pistorius talked about doubling the support for Germany for Ukraine at a point in which there seems to be some growing indication that there may be an effort from the NATO countries to dump the Zelensky government. The person who wrote in about this asked, where are the German people? Are they going to tolerate a doubling of the money and arms going into Ukraine from Germany?
That is the big question of the century. Where are the German people? Because Germany right now is falling apart. It's crashing against the wall. I mean, the latest figures concerning the economy is that the insolvency ratio in October was 22.5% of increase of insolvencies as compared to the months before. The months before it was 19.5% to the previous months. So we are really looking at an accelerating rate of bankruptcy. The same goes on in the sector of agriculture, where every day now 10 farms are closing down for insolvency reasons. Between 2010 and 2020, half of all pig growers, also people who raise pigs, have closed down. we are right now looking at a complete reduction of the agricultural production in Germany. And there are farmers who already told us a year ago that if this continues, soon Germany will have a tremendous food shortage, including animal feed and things like that. Now, if the German industry is collapsing like that, then that was what made the social state possible. So if people do not wake up now, then Germany will crash and become a completely Morgenthau, deindustrialized country. So, under these circumstances, to increase and actually double the amount of money to be sent to Ukraine at a moment when, many people in the United States and elsewhere are, saying that, the war is over, the Ukrainians have lost it. This is also said by General Kuyat, who made a video to this effect, which has gone absolutely viral on the internet. I think it's at almost 2 million viewers at this point. It's a sinkhole. Why would you throw money into a situation, which obviously was a tremendous miscalculation by NATO and everybody else who was involved in this war? And, I think that, there are so many things, like Mike Pompeo is now becoming chairman of in the presidium of some major American telephone company in Ukraine. So, the question of who profits from all of this is obviously something to be looked at. But I think, this war should be stopped in the same way. There must be immediate negotiations. And, I think the many offers which were made by the Pope, who offered the territory of the Vatican, by President Lula, by the Chinese 12-point program. So there were many, many offers, and they have to be taken up because the whole world is in one, it's one coherent place. And if you start to unravel it in one area and now in two, it has impacts on the whole world, and world peace is still hanging by a thread.
Well, we're talking with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, and I have one more question, which I think is an interesting one. It's someone who refers to this week's decision, or last week's decision by Moody's to downgrade the U.S. economy from stable to negative. He writes that there's now a $1 trillion a year debt service cost, that is interest on debt for the U.S. government. And he writes, LaRouche always said that cutting spending doesn't solve the problem of a deficit. But what can be done to reverse the increase in government debt?
Well, you would have to increase the productive activity of the country, generating more tax income and writing off the unpayable casino debt. I mean, you have a situation right now where this change by Moody's to value U.S. debt as negative, I mean, that is, even a mild description, because you have all these banks now who are sitting on unrealized losses. They keep them in the books because if they start to sell these bonds at the present market price, they would have to write off tremendous amounts of money. Many of them would not survive that, so they keep, they keep having these losses in the books. But the reality is naturally it's not much worth. So this is reaching sooner or later an absolute explosion point. And I think, if you remember the triple curve, which Lyndon LaRouche had presented as a pedagogical device, so to speak, to explain to people, what is the difference between the fictitious part of the money system and the real economy. In that curve, there comes a point when the financial aggregates and the monetary aggregates have a sort of a crossover. In other words, when no matter how much money you print, you cannot maintain the debt. And I think we are reaching that point, it really looks like we are reaching that point, not in the far future. And therefore, if the entire package which LaRouche proposed, first to have Glass-Steagall, you would need a global Glass-Steagall banking separation. You would write off the derivative outstanding contracts which you cannot repay. It's totally impossible. You separate the banks, you put the commercial banks under state protection, and then you create a national bank in every country which has the power of credit generation for new investment in production. You get the economy going, and you connect these national banks into a worldwide new credit system, and that way you could save it, and you could save those parts of the economy which are valid and functioning, and you keep them functioning. If you don't do that, you have the danger of an uncontrolled collapse, which would lead to chaos and unbelievable consequences. So I know there is right now almost no discussion about Glass-Steagall or any of the measures which I just mentioned, but we should remind people that solutions do exist. It's basically what Franklin D. Roosevelt did in 1933. And, one can only hope that there are legislators on all levels who start to really seriously look at that. And basically, it could all be solved. If, for example, if President Biden would, at the summit with Xi Jinping, basically say, look, we cleaned up San Francisco for your visit. There are no homeless people now. Before, there were 8,000 homeless in San Francisco alone, and they somehow relocated them to make the city look pretty. But, I have a serious interest to solve the homeless problem in all of the United States. I want to build fast trains. Can we cooperate that? Can you, bring in some Chinese engineers? We can do that in a crash program. You Chinese have demonstrated you can do this extremely quickly. We, on the other side, help you with some other problems elsewhere. I mean, it could be done. It could, you could have I don't want to create hopes which are not exactly realistic, but you could make a breakthrough, and Xi Jinping and Biden could come out of this meeting and say, look, we have a plan how to reorganize the whole world system. We go for sovereignty of every country, non-interference, human rights is when you overcome poverty. So therefore, we overcome poverty in Africa, in Latin America, in the poor parts of the United States and Europe. And that way the human rights question is taken care of as well. You could do wonders, but it would require, to really be a visionary and be carried by love for mankind. And one can only hope that, these two men express that.
I have one more question, but I'm going to take one of these questions from Fight Back in the chat room. Aren't the closing of the farms not a direct consequence of climate change policies to farming? This is in reference to what you said in Germany. That's definitely a big part of it. We can talk about that much more in the future, but I want to get to this last question, which came from Brazil, which is about the Argentine election coming up this weekend. He writes that there's one candidate who's a free market radical. Are the banks squeezing Argentina to make the situation bad enough that the Argentines will make the mistake and go for another swing to a free market radical?
I think there is a tremendous battle, because Argentina is one of the 6 countries who are supposed to join the BRICS 11 on the 1st of January. And, by trying to bring in now a candidate who will for sure not do that, or the hope is that he will not do that, that's an attempt against this whole idea of a new system emerging with the BRICS Plus. President Lula from Brazil, on the other side, has sent in some election advisors. So I think, the battle really is, will Argentina be part of a new world financial and credit system? being part of the new development bank, the new BRICS system which is emerging or not. And it's very clear that the financial powers to be, the financial oligarchy, is doing everything possible to prevent that from happening. And one can only hope that the Argentine people are smart enough to understand what the choices are for them. It's really between a potential beautiful future and hell.
Well, Helga, I know you have a lot to do, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And we'll probably have something very interesting, or hopefully interesting, to report next week from the Biden-Xi meeting. So thanks for joining us, and see you next week.
Yes, till next week.